it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. One of my favorite parts of capitalist realism, is when he describes that modernity is better at imagining apocalyptic scenarios than it is at imagining a post-capitalist system. He gives the example of like a Children of Men, the biggest TV shows or movies in recent history. The Walking Dead was huge. The Last of Us is huge. And why? The question is, why is modernity so good at imagining apocalyptic scenarios rather than a post-capitalist system?
And if you take into account Fisher's analysis of the slow cancellation of the future, couched within the larger idea of hauntology, the media of the 70s and the 80s was dominated by visions of the future.
And you have 80s synthwave, the original Star Wars was around that time, Back to the Future, you had Blade Runner. You still had coherent visions of the future. Even in the 1950s, like one of the biggest like kids TV shows, The Jetsons, this nuclear family up in the space. That's an interesting future.
Exactly.
I don't know what's more unfeasible today, a space colony or a nuclear family, at least in the West.
The Jetsons is the perfect example. That back then, that is what there was this mass psychosis about, right? There was this obsession with what can be in 20 to 30 years. This idea that as of now, we would have these flying cars and we'd have colonized space. And it was this collective aspiration. Because if you ask someone in the late 60s, you've reached space and then you've gone to the moon. Then a colony with the giant glass bubble around it, where the Jetsons and Arbaz and Momi live in peace and harmony, and there are no races anymore and everyone's light brown. That's like 30 years away. And as we've gone further and further into it, we have hit a kind of, I wouldn't even say technological barrier, but it's not a mass aspiration anymore. Back in the day, in the Cold War, the world is split broadly into two camps, and both of them have their hopes riding on
who's going to get to space first.
Exactly.
I've actually seen the space race and man landing on the moon described as the last truly Faustian act. There was no practical reason for man in the 60s to want to spend so much. You do it for pure love of the game, the pure Faustian spirit which wants to understand the world, bring it under its logical domain. That was the time that really felt like, oh, what does the future hold? It was an imaginative time.
And since then, that mass aspiration, that will it be the American bloc or the Soviet bloc that will first surmount the limits of humanity, you've gone to this privatization and siloization of this ambition. From civilizational endeavors to, can Elon Musk make this happen? Or can Jeff Bezos make this happen? And it has none of the glamour that I imagine it did back in the day. Like, yeah, 10 years you could do a honeymoon like around the moon or something.
Yeah.
But it has none of the fervor that the Jetsons would inspire.
As Jean-Francois Lyotard put it, and Fisher even cited, it's the end of all meta-narratives. Like back then you had this meta-narrative that, we could colonize space, humanity could, expand upwards and outwards, which doesn't necessarily exist anymore. Fisher also describes modernity, the post-World War era up until like the 70s, even 80s. It was characterized by a future-looking vision, whereas post-modernity is characterized by nostalgia and retrospection. And we can even see this in like our art. We can even see this in the pop culture today, where it's like a constant remixing of the past. You see 80s synths come back with The Weeknd, the constant remakes of old Disney movies from our youth into like live action and stuff. This is a constant remixing aspect. It's just nostalgia farming.